Welcome to the Center Square Radio Hour for the second weekend of August 2025. I'm your host, Chris Krug. Established in 2019 by the Franklin News Foundation, the Center Square publishes original taxpayer-centric straight news that focuses on the size, scope, and effectiveness of local, state, and federal government. On the Radio Hour, our journalists explore their top stories, adding insights to the headlines. We'll also present thoughts on the economy from Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist. Today, we'll look at the redistricting fight in Texas. We'll discuss what's happening and not happening in Congress, and we'll hear about the debt problems facing California. We'll be right back with all that and more in the Center Square Radio Hour.
What does freedom look like tomorrow? On the Future of Freedom podcast, we explore the principles behind our nation's founding freedoms and the policies required to sustain those freedoms. Featuring thought leaders and policy experts, each episode dives deep into debates around how to protect these principles now and into the future. Subscribe to the Future of Freedom wherever you get your podcasts and be part of the conversation.
Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug. With more on redistricting in Texas, it's Greg Bishop.
There's been a lot of talk about redistricting, even in the middle of a 10-year cycle, as Texas House Democrats fled the Lone Star states to head to places like Illinois in an effort to block Republicans voting on new maps in Texas that could give the GOP an advantage heading into the 2026 election. And they plan to remain AWOL. And as we record this Thursday afternoon, Texas Democrats still not in Texas, many of them in Illinois. And now the FBI seems to be getting involved. Joining me to discuss this and more is the Center Square executive editor, Dan McCaleb. Dan, what is going on here?
This is pretty crazy. Just to offer some brief background, Texas Governor Greg Abbott called a special session of the legislature after passing the budget and taking up other matters during the regular session. It started late last month. And one of the items that he wanted legislators to tackle was redistricting. As you mentioned, usually that happens every 10 years during the census. Abbott, at President Donald Trump's request, decided to tackle redistricting in the state of Texas. The new maps came out last week, proposed maps that have yet to be approved. That looks like it could swing 5 congressional districts into Republican hands. Currently, Texas has 38 seats in Congress because of its population. 23 of those seats are held by Republicans. 15 are held by Democrats. Compare that to a state like Illinois, which has 17 seats in Congress, where there are 14 elected Democrats and 3 elected Republicans. Anyway, Abbott asked for the new maps. A legislative commission drew up the new maps. As I said, they could flip 5 blue seats red, and Democrats don't want anything to do with it. The only way they could stop it is by fleeing the state. Dozens of them came up to suburban Chicago, where they've been staying since Sunday. And now Governor Abbott and others have asked, they've issued civil warrants for their arrest. When they return to Texas, they can be arrested. But since Governor Abbott asked for the civil warrants to be issued, U.S. Senator John Cornyn, who is a Republican from Texas, asked if the FBI could help find these Democrats. And the FBI said today, as we record this Thursday, that it will help find those House Democrats. Now, what happens if they do find them from there? That remains to be determined.
And one thing that we've heard from Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, who welcomed these Texas Democrats on Sunday, late Sunday. I was just getting to bed, Dan, while the governor welcomed these Democrats to rally together in Illinois, blasting Republicans, saying that they're cheating and saying that they're breaking the rules. And then the following day, we heard more rhetoric from Democrats holding more news conferences, again with the cheating rhetoric and we have to save our democracy. And then the following day, we started hearing the rhetoric heat up even more, talking about bringing knives to knife fights and guns to gun fights and fighting fire with fire. Is this all just political chest pounding, or could this possibly lead to some dominoes falling where if Texas makes a Republican more dominant map, will Illinois even be able to do that with as gerrymandered as Illinois' maps are.
Right.
But other states like Texas and as at New York and California.
California here. Governor Newsom of Gavin Newsom of California has said that he will fight fire with fire if Texas successfully redistricts its seats. He said he would come up with the same sort of plan in California. Now, California has a independent commission that redistricts every 10 years. So how it would work in California compared to how it's currently working in Texas, I'm not sure how that would work out. California is also gerrymandered. Let's face it, every state gerrymandered, who, depending on the party in power, they gerrymander their districts to make it easier for the party in power to hold on to that power. As we talked about up front, and you just mentioned Illinois, redistricting in Illinois isn't going to do any good. The maps are already so distorted to favor Democrats. They're not going to be able to squeeze another Republican seat out of Illinois. The question now becomes, how long do Democrats stay in Illinois? Texas Democrats stay in Illinois, and what can the federal government do about it? State police in Texas have no jurisdiction in Illinois to arrest anybody. Governor Pritzker said today that he was okay with the FBI coming to Illinois because even if they get here and find Democrats, they can't arrest them because he says they're not in violation of federal law. But something Governor Abbott out of Texas has also said is these Democrats who came to Illinois to avoid allowing a vote in the Texas legislature, they've been accepting funds. They've been actively seeking donations. And Governor Abbott and others in Texas have said that could amount to a bribery.
Governor J.B. Pritzker, when I asked him about that outside the 2025 Illinois State Fair ribbon cutting, he seemed to dismiss that question entirely, saying that, have you ever had to be away from your family? And we should be standing alongside these Texas Democrats, calling them heroes all throughout this week. And he doesn't really seem to have those concerns about the possibility of a line being crossed if a elected official is getting resources to not follow through with official legislative activity. So that question of if that's bribery, definitely one that we'll be following here. And I imagine, Dan, this is not the last time we're going to be talking about maps in the middle of the summer of 2025.
No, and it's important to note, Greg, just to close here, that next year, 2026, is the midterm elections. Every single U.S. House seat is up next year. So for control of Congress, Republicans have a slight edge in both the House, the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. And Republicans, of course, want to keep that power, whereas Democrats want to flip one or both chambers during the midterms. And this is all leading up to that.
Thank you, Dan and Greg. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on Congress, let's now go back to Dan McCaleb.
After keeping government funding essentially on cruise control for the past 11 months, Congress is facing the threat of a government shutdown on October 1st if it does not pass the 12 annual appropriations bill that fund federal agencies. Joining me to discuss this is the Center Square's congressional reporter, Therese Boudreau. Therese, Congress is in its August recess, but when House representatives and senators return, they have a lot of work to do yet again. Where are we at in the process, and how do lawmakers plan to meet such a tight deadline?
Yeah, so right now, we're not very far along in the process. As you said, both chambers of Congress are in recess right now, and the Senate has only passed 3 of the 12 appropriations bills in a minibus package, and the House has only passed 2. And one of the bills that the House has passed is for the same agencies that the Senate is passed for. So they're going to have to work out the kinks of that. We'll probably see that happen a lot. But again, when they get back, they only have a couple of weeks until the government until at least a partial government shutdown on October 1st. And the problem is that lawmakers don't really want to work together right now. Especially Democrats are still very angered over the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, the giant legislation that it did a lot of things, but it permanently extended the Trump tax cuts. It reformed Medicaid programs. It did a lot of things that Democrats were unhappy about. And then there was also a rescissions package, which drew back some government, like $9 billion in government funding for different foreign aid programs. So that was also something that all Democrats opposed. So they're really not in the mood right now to be talking with Republicans about what is normally a very bipartisan process, because obviously everyone wants to keep the government agencies running. Nobody wants a government shutdown. That would be very, very unpopular. And some have called it even political suicide if one of the sides says we're going to force a government shutdown. But again, there's not really a lot of room for talk right now. So the Senate's 3-bill minibus, that was bipartisan, but everything the House has been doing so far, when it's been passing out of committees and trying to get to the floor and getting to the floor in some cases, has been much less so. And again, if the Senate and the House both pass one of the same 12 bills, they have to make sure they're the same thing. So basically what we're looking at is we only have, by the time that Congress gets back, we'll only have, I think it's less than 3 weeks, to pass all of those, the 12 appropriations bills. That is a very, very tight deadline, even if Congress was working together and everything was bipartisan and hunky-dory. So what's most likely going to happen is there's probably going to be another continuing resolution, which essentially would keep government funding on cruise control. They can make a little changes, but that's essentially what it does. And that would be the 4th time in a row that Congress has done that rather than pass all 12 appropriations bills. This past year, 11 months, coming up on 12 months, fiscal year 2025, there were no appropriations bills that passed. We've just been running off of 3 continuous CRs, continuing resolutions. So that might happen again, if lawmakers can't get their act together.
These continuing resolutions, essentially what they do is they extend previous budget bills or appropriations bills that have passed, just continue that funding. As you said, they could make some minor changes there, but it's not a new appropriations bill. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And so different needs that might arise in different agencies, like if the FDA says, oh, we need more money to combat bird flu or something like that. And we need it in this specific way that only the appropriations process can give us, then the CRs actually become very unhelpful. They're not enough, right? There are different needs that the agencies have that sometimes can't be met because they're just stuck with whatever Congress did appropriate to them in the 12 bills in fiscal year 2024 at this point. So it's definitely tricky. There have been talks between Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. But President Donald Trump has also inserted himself in the process a lot, and I think it seems like kind of blown up some things sometimes. So we're on really rocky footing right now. It's possible, that all 12 pass, but it is highly unlikely. And Thune has already essentially been talking about, we might have to do a CR again. So it'd be a 4th CR. But since Senate passed the minibus, that goes to the House now. It's pretty bipartisan. Hopefully it passes the House. If it passes the House, then that means that the minibus, the 3 bills that were in it were the ones that fund the legislative branch, the military, construction and veterans affairs. And then, it's slipping my mind. There's only 3 of them. But those at least you wouldn't need the CR to cover those agencies. So you'd have at least some agencies essentially that have updated funding. So that's where we're at right now. It's not ideal. The One Big Beautiful Bill was a huge factor in the reason why it took them so long to craft these 12 bills. It just took up a lot of time. Even though they passed the last CR in March, so they've had months and months. But again, it's been kind of a whirlwind, Congress. So, makes sense that they'd be a bit behind schedule, but we'll just have to see.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Therese. Listeners can keep up with this ongoing budget battle at thecentersquare.com.
A big thanks to Dan and Therese. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on California's financial state, we'll go to Keegan Kernodle.
Joining me is the Center Square's LA-based reporter, Kenneth Schrupp. Today we're talking about California's soon-to-be billion-dollar interest on COVID fraud. Kenneth, can you tell me more about this?
Hey, Keegan. California gave out what state offices have estimated as $55 billion in fraudulent COVID-19 unemployment benefits claims. Well, they say ineligible, which, really does include fraudulent. The cost of these state debt payments on the interest has gone from, $0 in 2019. The state had paid off its unemployment insurance debt from the global financial crisis. It's almost $600 million this year. And the state-funded legislative analyst office says it's soon going to be $1 billion a year. And this will all soon result in annual payroll tax increases, or could rather, depending on what actions are taken by the state, of about $500 per employee. But for some background here, let's talk about what unemployment insurance is and who pays for it. There are two components to unemployment insurance taxes. You have the federal payroll tax related to unemployment insurance and your state payroll tax. The federal payroll tax on unemployment insurance is actually 6%, but if your state doesn't have any debt to the federal government that's been used to pay for the state administered unemployment insurance benefits, you get a credit of 5.4%, meaning your rate is 0.6%. However, after the first 2 years that you have debt, you get another 0.3% of your credit taken away. California is currently paying 1.8%. It's got 1.2% church surcharge added. That's the state side. That's the federal side. On the state side, we have a slightly different system. You pay as the employer, pay the payroll tax rate depending on, the credits and debits of the unemployment benefits used by your former employees compared to what you've paid on. This rate, though, is currently about 3.5%, which is, again, as the LAO noted, lower than it should be. It should be over 5%, but the state had a policy during COVID of just not counting all of the firing that was done during that time. I think it was a few years period during the COVID-19 era, and that has permanently suppressed the rates that all businesses are paying on payroll tax, because on a normal basis, people get laid off and they go on benefits. That's just part of living, working. That's just part of running a business. Given that you just didn't include quite a large number of layoffs for a very long time, that formula is now weighed significantly down. So we have this situation where the state, they didn't really do a lot of verification of claims for unemployment insurance. There's a lot of fraud. There was some investigations that found that everyone from Nigerian scammers to people who are actually in California prisons, prison inmates, to even organized crime, just taking in billions of dollars. Some estimates from the state auditor in the $30 billion range. The state employment development department that oversees the UI program, they've made claims of up to about $55 billion. That's what they told the state auditor's office. Either way, these fraudulent or ineligible benefits payments are more than the annual budget of NASA. So instead of, we could have gone to space for another year or two instead of paying out these fraudulent benefits to often criminals or people who aren't even in this country or people who are in prison. The state took out a $20 billion loan to cover this massive amount of fraudulent payments, and it has to try to pay it off. The issue here is that the loan is so large and it still has an annual deficit on its unemployment insurance program of about $2 billion a year. So even with the higher rates, it's still not actually paying down the principal. And if you look at the expected growth and the debt, the state's debt to the federal government for this program is expected to keep growing. And now the other question is, okay, well, who's going to be paying for this? The state has to pay the interest on this, but it is businesses who are going to have to pay back the actual principal, which is just the result of, again, the state just giving out money from a helicopter, just chucking bags of cash, not literally, but they just weren't really doing enough verification. And now businesses are the ones who are having to pay for it. Just to put things in context, the federal unemployment tax at 0.6%, it only applies to the first $7,000 paid to your employee. So that's $42. If you're at the full 6% rate, that's $420 or a 10-time increase. This is expected to cost businesses about $4 to $5 billion a year if they go up to the full 6% rate. This is a time when private employment in the state is not doing well. The state lost a net 80,000 jobs in 2024. Separate sort of report on the jobs data between January 2023 and January 2025 found that the state lost a total of 173,000 private sector jobs in net during that time. However, overall, employment still grew during that 2-year period because government and government-funded jobs grew by 181,000. This is putting more pressure on the system, though, because most government jobs are exempt from paying state and federal unemployment insurance payroll taxes. So that's just putting more pressure on the private sector. We have dwindling private sector employment, growing government employment or government-funded employment, and the result is you've got this pressure on businesses. So I've talked to business leaders about this, and they note that this is one of like many challenges that businesses will face when hiring people. There already is this incentive against full-time employment under the Affordable Care Act, where you have to provide full-time and ever more expensive health insurance benefits to employees once they're working over 30 hours a week. So you see a clustering just under 30 hours a week. But now if you add on this tax, again, remember, there's also been a fast food minimum wage hike to $20 an hour, which has also put pressure on businesses to maybe not hire as many employees. Then we also, if we have this tax that is pretty much going to go up, the payroll tax of about $500 on the first $7,000 that an employee makes, you're really you don't have an incentive to hire employees for, limited part-time positions, like a summer job for a teenager or a college student. Because if your first $7,000 is getting taxed an extra $500 as your employer, then you're going to want to hire people for as many hours and as much as you can before hitting that 30-hour a week mark. But you're going to end up in a situation where businesses are trying to hire as few employees as possible and have them working as many hours as they can while staying below the line. And it'll be a weird situation where a lot of workers, they won't really make enough to really live on. But they're going to be working almost full time, so they can't really do a lot of other things.
Well, thank you, Kenneth, for keeping up on this and your reporting on it. Readers and listeners can keep up with the story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Thank you, Keegan and Kenneth. After the break, we'll look at more top stories from across the nation. What is the state of the debate over transit funding in Pennsylvania? Why is President Trump bringing back the presidential fitness test? And why are so many new graduates moving to Albuquerque? All that and more when we return on the Center Square Radio Hour. Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug. Here are this week's quick hits, some of the original reporting you may have missed at thecentersquare.com. 5 soldiers injured Wednesday at Fort Stewart in Georgia are stable and expected to recover from a shooting by an active duty soldier, military officials say. 3 of the 5 wounded soldiers required surgery. The suspect was identified as Army Sergeant Cornelius Radford of the 2nd Brigade Combat Team. Radford has never been deployed to combat, has since been interviewed by the Army Criminal Investigation Division, according to Brigadier General John Lubis. Lubis indicated that the suspect didn't use a military-issued weapon. He praised other soldiers for quickly stopping the shooter. Fort Stewart is home to the Army's 3rd Infantry Division, approximately 15,000 active-duty Army soldiers, 400 other military members, and about 16,000 active duty family members. Citing quote unquote out of control crime in the nation's capital, President Donald Trump is threatening to federalize Washington, D.C. He suggests the district prosecute minors as young as 14 as adults following a spate of youth-driven violent crime. In a True Social post made on Tuesday, the president criticized the district's handling of crime, specifically its youth crime problem, pointing a finger at the city's quote-unquote soft on crime approach. A U.S. House committee issued subpoenas for key government officials, including former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, as part of a congressional investigation into well-connected financier and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, Representative James Comer, issued subpoenas Tuesday to the Clintons, former FBI Director James Comey, former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, former U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, and others as part of the House investigation. Republican attorneys general from 25 states are backing President Donald Trump's executive order aimed at halting federal funding for sex change procedures on minors. Massachusetts filed a brief joined by 19 states challenging the same executive order. The states that oppose the Trump executive order argue the order is unconstitutional, discriminatory, and violates the spending clause by tying federal health funds to ideological conditions. Those supporting Trump's order argue that continuing to fund such procedures violates both medical ethics and constitutional principles. A Commonwealth Foundation analysis finds Pennsylvania students are not being provided with safe school choice options as the law requires because of its weak definition of persistently dangerous. Senior education policy analyst at the Commonwealth Foundation, Rachel Langan, told the Center Square that federal and state law require that students attending a persistently dangerous school or those experiencing violence at school be provided with a transfer to a safe charter school within their own district, or at a neighboring district. Langan said Pennsylvania law defines a dangerous school based on the number of arrests, not the number of incidents. You can find more on these stories and others like them from across the country at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more on the Center Square Radio Hour.
Tired of news that tells you what to think rather than what to think about? At the Center Square, we bring you the reliable, credible news you need focused on what actually matters: government accountability, taxes, and the decisions affecting your community. Our award-winning newsroom cuts through the noise to deliver fact-driven journalism you can trust. Stay informed. Visit thecentersquare.com today and subscribe. Once again, that is thecentersquare.com.
Welcome back to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm Chris Krug. With more on public transit funding in Pennsylvania, let's go to Kristen Smith.
Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Christina Langell. We've been following closely this story out of Pennsylvania that kind of echoes what's been happening nationally with mass transit systems as they've struggled to recover after pandemic losses when everyone worked from home. And in Pennsylvania, we have the Southeastern Regional Transportation Authority, and we call it SEPTA. And they are in dire straits as well, struggling to make up for that ridership as well as aging infrastructure and just basically support to help support the economic region in general. And so we're coming up on a big deadline, aren't we?
Yes. So there is a major budget shortfall for SEPTA. I think it's around $134 million currently that they're about to hit. If the state legislature doesn't do something to approve additional funding for mass transit by the 14th, which is a week from when we're speaking, next Thursday, if they don't do something to fund it by then, there will be major cuts to the system. So they're going to be just cutting routes out entirely. This includes a lot of routes that people take to work or school every day. They will be raising fares. They will be reducing the amount of offerings on the routes that they do keep. So, less likely to find times that run into when you need to be there. And also, you're going to have a lot more people on those things because the routes have been reduced. So it's a pretty big calamity approaching for Philadelphia. That's all expected to go into effect on August 24th. The school year for the Philadelphia School District begins August 25th, and a lot of those students use public transportation to get to school.
Yeah, it's much bigger. I think for those of us who live outside of the region that is served by SEPTA, we don't think of how important mass transit is when it comes to getting to school and to your doctor's appointments and to simply getting around. In a place like Philly, you're not as car reliant as you would be in the rest of the state. And so that factors into people's economic situations. And so they really rely on that mass transit. And we've been dealing with a bus shortage in Pennsylvania for several years. So mass transit's really filled a gap there as far as getting kids to school, which I think we all agree is vital for kids, for our economy, for every part of our lives, quite frankly. And speaking of the rest of the state, the big struggle here with this, which has been years ongoing, as we mentioned before, the big struggle has been that SEPTA has been saying, this is a problem, we need more help from the state. And the state, particularly in the Senate, has been really slow to react. They've been concerned that SEPTA hasn't taken enough accountability for its own management. They have, Senate Republicans who control that chamber have wanted to see more accountability from the system. They've wanted more, they were worried about rising crime, although that has been lowering in the last few years. They've just wanted to find a way to make sure that this money that they will be giving, because it's a significant amount, almost $300 million, that this will go to good use because there is good fiscal management already happening. So those those qualifications have been on any mass transit deal that could happen. And so the conversation's been really evolving over the last couple of years to get there. And yesterday, actually, we had a transportation bill that specifically in the House, one of the representatives who sponsored it, I think it was Representative Doherty, he went through point by point which elements from the Senate's own transportation bills were included. So can you talk a little bit more about what those are?
Yes. So he tied all of the funding in this bill to the sorts of performance measures that the Senate has proposed. So ideally, this fifth bill would include, if it moves forward from the House, it would include both the things that the Senate wants and the things that the House has been asking for. So specifically the way that the funding works that they're asking for is, it will be an increase of the sales tax that is already received by the state. So they're not going to increase sales tax for consumers. They're going to increase the percentage of the sales tax that goes towards mass transit. And the reason they say they can do this is because sales have gone up. So they've had more sales tax revenue, and they say it's a bigger pot. We can give more to Philadelphia. We can give more to mass transit, not just Philadelphia. That's important. But because we have these concerns about SEPTA, we will require these reporting and measurements when it comes to things like crime, things like staying on budget. But it kind of comes down to this funding measure proposed by Governor Shapiro in his budget, which would be, that sales tax measure. Republicans have said, well, where is new funding coming from? We could see the co-chair of the House Transportation Committee, Benninghoff, as you mentioned, he said, well, sure, we have extra money from sales tax right now, but that's not necessarily, going to continue into the future. We can't really predict how that's going to work out. So we need more stable funding. And that's when, you have Democrats come back and say, well, we tried to pass adult use marijuana and you all didn't want to. And that would have been additional revenue to the state. So they're sort of in an impasse as to how it's funded, but it kind of comes to this more fundamental question of whether or not you believe that mass transit is a public service or something that should be run more like a business.
There will be a lot of developments on this front in the next couple of days. And to keep up with those developments, follow us at thecentersquare.com/Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Kristen and Christina. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. With more on the presidential fitness test, it's Eliana Cernodi.
The presidential fitness test is coming back. Here to tell us more about this is Esther Wickham, education reporter for the Center Square. So, Esther, tell us a little bit about this test, its background, and why it's returning.
Yeah, thanks, Aliana. Yes, no pun intended, but the president has brought this back up and running. President Donald Trump signed an executive order last week, kind of finishing out the month of July, to bring back the presidential fitness test to American schools. And, this is something that was introduced back in 1966 by President Lyndon B. Johnson, but was unfortunately phased out in 2012 during the Obama administration. And essentially, the Obama administration said that they wanted to focus more on students' health than necessarily athletic performance. So basically, the fitness test requires, students ages 10 through 17 to do a set number of physical activities, whether that be running a mile, doing a set number of sit-ups, and you could do, pull-ups or push-ups, and then the sit and reach test. And this was a requirement. Usually it was 1 to 2 times a year students would have this test. But once Obama was in office, after 2012, it was changed to the Youth Fitness Program. And again, as I said, they wanted to focus more on student health. And that's where the First Lady, Michelle Obama, kind of introduced some certain programs within even schools, food environment, what kind of, students are eating healthy, making sure they're dieting or eating good things. And so that was kind of their initiative within the Obama administration. But once Trump was in office, he was like, we want to bring this back. It's a tradition that he thinks is important to have in American schools. And he's restoring, it's not only just a fitness test, but there's also fitness awards. So, if people hit a certain marker, they can get awarded an award or a prize. And so, this has been a big issue for the Trump administration since we have seen that America is on a decline with health and physical fitness. This is something that was kind of an issue when Obama was in office, but with their initiative, the numbers didn't necessarily match up with the increase, with student physical health and physical activity. There is still a high rate of obesity or chronic disease and inactivity. And that's largely due to, as everyone would say, technology, phones, iPads, and just as a whole nationally, there has been a decline not only in physical health, but also mental health with American students, and it's been neglected. And the White House, in a statement said that, and there is a huge crisis that is happening, particularly among children. And so their goal in bringing back the presidential fitness test is to get these students back on track to be healthy and to be in a good mental environment, as well in their youth.
And a lot of different people have responded to this, both negatively and positively. What are some different people saying about bringing this back?
Yeah, so in response, a few elementary school teachers, people that are, professors of health and education, kinesiology have responded to this. One elementary physical education specialist from Louisiana State University said that, this is a common thing. Everyone can agree that there is a lack of physical activity, physical education in school, and that has been limited. And kind of emphasized that even though this is something that's an issue, we don't need to necessarily bring back the presidential fitness test. What we have in place is okay. And another professor of kinesiology at Michigan State University, Jacqueline Goodway, told the New York Times in an article that, they want to ensure not only the physical performance or athletic performance is a priority, but also ensuring that students have an increase in skills, knowledge, and behavior for a lifetime of physical activity and physical fitness. And so what she basically means by that is, in stating the presidential fitness test, a lot of times it can be seen to students as just kind of like a one and done thing, right? You hit your marker, you hit your goal, and then you just kind of move on. Where she's stating, though it may be a good thing to bring back to the schools, we also want to make sure that we are incentivizing. It's not just you come to school, you do that workout, and then you're good to go for the rest of the evening or the weekend, and you can just eat Chick-fil-A or In-N-Out or McDonald's and you're fine. You know, they want to invite this mindset of healthy habits, a good, you know, behavior in reducing, you know, sugar or carbs or whatever works for your body. So that after they get out of high school, especially entering college where you have so much freedom, to eat and do a lot of things, they want to, you know, incentivize that. So that's kind of a caution that a lot of physical fitness educators and experts have been saying, making sure that it's not just about performance and, you know, granting awards or prizes to students and hitting that mark, but making sure that students have the necessary physical education so that once they grow up and once they get older, they have the tools to expand their knowledge of what mental health and what physical health actually looks like on a day-to-day basis.
Viewers can continue to follow this story and others at thecentersquare.com.
Thank you, Eliana and Esther. You're listening to the Center Square Radio Hour. I'm your host, Chris Krug. Joining me to dig into some of the top cities for 2025 graduates, it's PhD economist Dr. Orphe Divounguy. Now, you have to lay the truth out for me on this. Albuquerque, New Mexico is, I think it's one of the more slept on and overlooked little big cities or big little cities in the United States. And of course, it's in New Mexico. And unless you're going to New Mexico on purpose, you're not probably going to be driving through New Mexico or certainly flying through New Mexico. So how did it become the place for college graduates?
I want to say it's probably still becoming. It's not, you know, like, yeah, I said,
it's not fully croissant just yet.
I think it's becoming. And part of that is, well, it's affordable, right? Number one, it's affordable. Number two, both for the for sale market, but also the rental market, relatively more affordable.
And to be clear, Albuquerque is number two, but I'm giving Albuquerque the headline because, you know, nobody ever gives Albuquerque the headline. We're giving Albuquerque the headline. It's a fine city. I have friends in Albuquerque. Austin is still ranked number one. Although layoffs, I mean, in the tech sector, can't be doing any favors for Austin. And I wanted to focus on Albuquerque. Why? What? But tell me why.
So what went into the index? Affordability, rent affordability, right? But also recent graduates, incomes, and job openings. And the data for job openings, you know, gotta give credit where credit is due, comes from Indeed's hiring lab. Indeed hiring lab, really cool resource for job postings. And so when you look at all those factors, what you learn very quickly is that it's a great place if you're young, you know, college educated, you got your college degree, but you may not have a ton of experience yet, right? Jobs for job postings for college educated, bachelor degree workers without a lot of experience are somewhat plentiful.
So we're really talking about the rental markets in these cities, to be clear. Although Albuquerque, from an affordability standpoint, on the buy side, is it's a pretty interesting place.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at the Zillow Market Heat Index, if you look at the bargaining power and kind of competition amongst buyers, you learn very quickly that it's a place where there's just not a lot of inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And because there isn't a lot of inventory, you know, competition remains somewhat stiff among buyers. It's also a place that's getting a lot of investment. I mean, these are industries like aerospace and chip manufacturing. And so, you know, those are healthier labor markets for young folks. And so they're attracted to those new industries and they're attracted to the affordability. And so I like it. I like it. And I think this is a market that's potentially starved for inventory and where, if you're a seller in that market, or if you're a housing provider, you may actually, kind of reap the benefits. Of course, I say that, and you just mentioned to me before this conversation that, potentially you're starting to see some layoffs in some of the industries, in those industries. But yeah, I think this is, when you compare it to a lot of other markets, I think this is one that has a lot of potential.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Austin, and not to put you on the spot on Austin, because I'm looking at the data. Typical rent in Austin now, and we can go back to Albuquerque and make a comparison contrast. And actually, let me start with this. Top 5 markets for recent college graduates per this report from Zillow. Austin is number 1. Albuquerque is number 2. Dallas is number 3. San Antonio is 4. And Charlotte, North Carolina is 5. Not a lot of surprises on that list, I would say, except for Albuquerque. But in Austin, one of the data points is that among the rental listings, that 61% of them are offering some kind of a concession.
Yeah.
So an extra month for, you stay there for 13 months, you pay for 12 kind of thing, or, you're some kind of, I don't know, what are the other incentives that are being offered nowadays?
Waived application fees, reduced security deposit.
Yeah.
Free parking, right?
Yeah.
1 month rent free.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all the types of concessions that landlords are offering. So why is that? Well, it is because you basically have a construction boom, that took place in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have a ton of inventory, even more inventory than you had before the pandemic in that market. That's actually good. If you're going to move into that market right now, well, you have choices. You have options. You have more bargaining power, right? So probably not the best place to be a seller, but a great place to be a young, college grad getting a new job and being able to take advantage of, lower rents, maybe, some concessions. Mm-hmm. And if you're interested in the for sale market, a ton more inventory, a lot of bargaining power, and some great options.
Appreciate your insight as always, Orfe. That'll do it for another week of the Center Square Radio Hour. If you missed some of today's show, you can find it wherever you find podcasts. I'm Chris Krug, on behalf of everyone at Franklin News Foundation. Thank you for listening to the Center Square Radio Hour.